The city of New York pulsed with its eternal rhythm, a symphony of honking taxis, hurried footsteps, and the distant hum of ambition. As twilight draped its velvet curtain over Manhattan, Candis Florenciano, a poised and fiercely independent Black American woman, stepped out of the gleaming glass tower of Evans Enterprises. Her heels clicked against the pavement, a steady metronome to her thoughts, which were already drifting toward the quiet sanctuary of her Brooklyn apartment. The day had been long meetings, stacked upon meetings, emails flooding her inbox, and the ever-present weight of being the indispensable secretary to Felix Evans, the enigmatic CEO, whose charm and authority commanded every room. Candis adjusted the strap of her leather tote, her dark eyes scanning the bustling street for a yellow cab. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor, mingling with the metallic tang of the city. She was ready to sink into her couch, perhaps with a glass of Merlot, and the soft croon of jazz to unravel the day's knots. But fate had other plans. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sharp vibration that startled her from her reverie. She fished it out, expecting a last-minute request from Felix, perhaps a reminder to schedule a meeting or revise a contract. The screen glowed with his name, and she sighed her breath, forming a faint cloud in the chilly air. "Hello, sir," she answered, her voice professional, yet warm, a balance she'd perfected over 2 years of working for him. But the voice on the other end was not Felix's. It was rougher, tinged with urgency, and the faint clink of glasses in the background. "Hello, Miss Candis. This is Jake, a bartender at the Velvet Haven in Greenwich Village. I'm calling from Mr. Evans' phone. He's, well, had too much to drink and not in great shape. Can you come pick him up?" Candis froze, her fingers tightening around the phone. Felix Evans, the man whose meticulous control defined his every move, drunk. The image was as incongruous as snow in July. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. "And why are you using his phone?" "He left it on the bar," Jake replied, his voice hurried. "Your number was the last one he called. Look, he's not himself tonight. I don't know what's going on, but he's been muttering your name between shots of bourbon. Can you get here soon? We're at 132 West 4th Street. Candis's mind raced, Felix muttering her name. The thought sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, one she quickly dismissed as irritation. Why was he in a bar of all places when he had a board meeting tomorrow morning? She glanced at the taxi idling nearby, its driver gesturing impatiently. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As the taxi wove through the neon-lit streets, Candis leaned back, her thoughts tangled with frustration and curiosity. Felix was not just her boss. He was a puzzle she'd never quite solved. A white American man in his early 30s, he carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone born into privilege. Yet there was a depth to him, a flicker of vulnerability she'd glimpsed in rare moments, like when he'd linger after a meeting to ask her opinion on a strategy, or share a quiet laugh over a client's eccentricity. Those moments, fleeting as they were, had stirred something in her, a warmth she refused to name. The taxi pulled outside the Velvet Haven, a dimly lit lounge with a dark brick facade and frosted glass. The sign above flickered in crimson neon, casting a sultry glow over the sidewalk. Candis paid the driver and stepped out, her heart pounding with apprehension and resolve. She pushed open the heavy door, and the scent of aged whiskey and jasmine enveloped her. The bar was alive with low murmurs, clinking glasses, and the soft strum of a guitar from a corner stage. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the familiar figure of Felix Evans. She found him at the bar's far end, slumping over the polished mahogany counter. His tailored suit jacket was draped carelessly over a stool, his white shirt slightly unbuttoned, revealing a glimpse of his collarbone. His dark blonde hair, usually impeccably styled, fell in disarray across his forehead. Candis's breath caught not at his disheveled state, but at the raw vulnerability etched into his features. Even in this moment of weakness, he had an undeniable allure, a magnetic pull that made her heart stutter. "Felix," she called softly, stepping closer. He didn't stir. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch tentative. "Felix, it's Candis time to go home." His head lifted slowly, his blue eyes glassy but piercing as they met hers. "Candis," he murmured, his voice thick with liquor and something else, something heavy unspoken. "You came." "Of course I came," she replied, her tone blending exasperation and concern. "You're a mess. Let's get you out of here." With the bartender's help, she guided Felix to his feet. He leaned heavily against her, his warmth seeping through her coat, his breath carrying the sharp bite of bourbon. "You're always saving me," he mumbled, his words slurring as they stumbled toward the door. Candis didn't respond. She focused on keeping him upright as they entered the cool night air. Another taxi awaited, and she eased him into the back seat, her mind racing with questions. What had driven him to this? Felix was not a man who lost control. He was the one who commanded boardrooms, negotiated million-dollar deals, and always seemed 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Yet, he was vulnerable and broken, leaning against her, as if she were his only anchor. The ride to his Upper East Side penthouse was silent, except for the engine's hum and Felix's occasional murmurs. Candis stared out the window, watching the city blur past Times Square's dazzling lights, the shadowed elegance of Park Avenue. Her thoughts drifted to the past 2 years, to the late nights they'd spent poring over contracts, the way his eyes would linger on her just a moment too long, the way her heart would race when he smiled. She pushed those thoughts away, reminding herself that he was her boss, nothing more. When they reached his sleek glass and steel tower building, the doorman greeted them with a nod, tactfully ignoring Felix's state. Candis guided him into the elevator, her arm around his waist, his weight both a burden and a strange comfort. The penthouse was a study in luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city, modern art adorning the walls, and a plush leather couch that beckoned like a promise of rest. She helped Felix onto the sofa, his head lolling back as he muttered something incoherent. "Stay here," she said, her voice firm but gentle. She fetched a glass of water from the kitchen, its sleek marble countertops gleaming under the soft lights. When she returned, Felix watched her, his eyes clearer now, though still clouded with something she couldn't name. "Candis," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Why are you so good to me?" She froze, the glass trembling in her hand. The question hung between them, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to face. "Because it's my job," she replied, her tone sharper than intended. "Now drink this and get some rest." But as she turned to leave, his hand caught hers, his touch warm and steady despite his inebriation. "Stay," he whispered, his eyes searching hers. "Please." She hesitated momentarily, caught in the intensity of his gaze. The city hummed below, a distant reminder of the world beyond this moment. She should leave. She knew she should call another taxi and return to the safety of her own life. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, held her captive, and so she stayed. The following hours were a blur of quiet conversations, Felix's slurred confessions of stress from a recent merger, and Candis's attempts to keep him grounded. She sat beside him, her presence a steadying force, as he spoke of pressures she'd only glimpsed in boardroom silences. The night deepened, and with it an unspoken tension grew, a thread of longing that neither dared to name. Felix's words grew softer as the clock ticked past midnight, his head resting against her shoulder. Candis felt the weight of his trust, the vulnerability he rarely showed. She told herself she was only doing her duty, that this was just another task in her role as his secretary. But deep down, in a corner of her heart, she rarely visited. A spark flickered, a dangerous, beautiful spark that threatened to change everything. The penthouse was bathed in the soft glow of dawn, the first rays of sunlight slipping through the towering windows to dance across the hardwood floor. Candis Florenciano stirred, her body heavy with an unfamiliar ache, her mind clouded with fragments of the night before. Felix's cologne lingered on her skin, a heady mix of cedarwood and spice that sent a jolt of realization through her. She sat up abruptly, the silk sheets sliding from her shoulders, and her breath caught as she saw him. Felix Evans, her boss, lying beside her, his chest rising and falling in the quiet rhythm of sleep. Panic surged through her, sharp and unrelenting. What had she done? The memories flooded back, Felix's hand in hers, his whispered pleas, the way the boundaries between them had dissolved in the night's heat. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding as if it could outrun the truth. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a chasm, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. Felix. Her voice cracked, a mix of fury and fear. He stirred, his blue eyes blinking open, clouded with confusion. Candis. He murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Then, as awareness dawned, his expression shifted to one of horror. "Oh, God! What happened? You tell me," she snapped, pulling the sheet tighter around her. "You were drunk. I brought you home. And then—" Her words faltered, the weight of them too heavy to speak. She turned away, her dark curls falling over her face like a curtain, shielding her from his gaze. Felix sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Candis, I don't remember everything, but I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." His voice was raw, stripped of the polished confidence she knew so well. "Please, tell me what I can do to make this right." "Make it right," she echoed, her tone biting. "Can you fix this with an apology? I trusted you, Felix. I brought you home because I thought it was my job to look out for you. And now—" Her voice broke, and she hated the vulnerability it betrayed. She was Candis Florenciano, who handled crises with unflinching resolve and kept Evans Enterprises running smoothly behind the scenes. She wasn't supposed to be this hurt, exposed and undone. Felix reached for her, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice low, earnest. "But I'm not going to walk away from this. Let me take care of you, Candis. Whatever you need. Medical care, time off, anything. Just tell me." She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "I need this never to happen," she said, each word deliberate. "But since that's not an option, I need you to promise this stays between us. No one at the company, no one in your high society circle can know." He nodded, his expression solemn. "I swear. This is our secret." The days that followed were a delicate dance of avoidance and necessity. Candis stayed in Felix's penthouse, her body still aching from the night that had changed everything. He was true to his word, arranging for a private doctor to visit, ensuring a team of discreet caregivers brought her clothes and essentials. With its breathtaking views of the Hudson River and sleek minimalist decor, the penthouse became a refuge and a cage. Candis felt the weight of her decision to stay torn between her pride and the practical need for rest. Felix was a constant presence, yet he kept his distance, his actions speaking louder than words. He cooked breakfast, simple omelets with herbs, a surprising contrast to his polished persona. He left notes with instructions for the caregivers, ensuring Candis had everything she needed. Each gesture was a quiet apology, a plea for forgiveness she wasn't ready to grant. Yet in those moments, She glimpsed a side of him she'd never seen, a tenderness that softened the edges of his commanding presence. One evening, as the city skyline glittered beyond the windows, Candis sat on the couch, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. Felix entered his tie, loosened his face, etched with the fatigue of a long day at the office. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. "Better," she said, her tone guarded. "The doctor said I need rest." He nodded, sitting across from her, his eyes searching hers. "Candis, I know you're angry, and have every right to be. But I want you to know I'm here, not just because I feel guilty, but because I care about you." Her heart fluttered, a traitor to her resolve. She said, "You're my boss, Felix." Her voice steady, despite the storm within. Caring is part of the job description. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Not like this. Not how I've always noticed you, how you light up a room with your wit and handle every challenge with grace. I've admired you for a long time, Candis. Last night, it wasn't just the alcohol, it was me wanting you." The confession hung in the air, a dangerous spark in the quiet room. Candis felt her defenses waver, the walls she'd built trembling under the weight of his words. She wanted to dismiss them, to call them a lie, born of guilt. But there was truth in his eyes. A raw honesty mirrored the spark she'd felt that night. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was Beatrice, her best friend from Los Angeles, her voice bright and teasing across the miles. "Candis, where are you? I swear I heard a man's voice just now. Spill the tea, girl." Candis forced a laugh, her eyes flicking to Felix. "It's nothing, B. Work stuff." She ended the call quickly, her heart racing. Keeping this secret would be more complicated than she thought, especially with Beatrice's relentless curiosity. As the days turned into a week, Candis noticed subtle changes in herself, a lingering tenderness, a flicker of warmth when Felix entered the room. She told herself it was nothing, that she was simply grateful for his care. But late at night, when the city was quiet and she lay awake in the guest room, she couldn't shake the memory of his touch, the way it had felt both reckless and right. Felix, too, was wrestling with his own turmoil. He buried himself in work, but his thoughts drifted to Candis. Her laughter filled the office, and her presence grounded him. He knew he'd crossed a line, but couldn't entirely regret it. Something about her had always drawn him in, and now, with the weight of their shared secret, that pull was stronger than ever. As the week drew close, Candis prepared to return to her Brooklyn apartment, determined to reclaim her independence. But a part of her lingered in the penthouse, in the quiet moments with Felix, in the unspoken promise of something more. She didn't know it yet, but the night that had shattered her world was only the beginning, a spark that would ignite a journey neither of them could have foreseen. The dawn had long since faded, replaced by the golden haze of a New York afternoon that spilled through the towering windows of Felix Evans's Upper East Side penthouse. Candis Florenciano sat on the edge of the plush guest bed, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of the silk duvet, her thoughts a storm of regret and resolve. The ache in her body had dulled to a quiet throb, but the weight of what had transpired between her and Felix lingered heavy as the city's skyline beyond the glass. She was no longer just his secretary, the poised black woman who kept his world in order. She was something else now, undefined, vulnerable, and dangerously entangled. Felix stood in the kitchen, his broad shoulders tense as he prepared coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the faint scent of his cologne that still clung to Candis's memory. He had insisted she stay, his voice earnest with a guilt she could feel across the room. He said, "You need rest." His blue eyes searching hers for forgiveness she wasn't ready to give. She had agreed, not out of weakness, but because the thought of facing her Brooklyn apartment, its familiar walls, now tainted by the chaos of that night, felt unbearable. The silence between them was fragile, broken only by the soft clink of porcelain as Felix set a steaming mug on the coffee table before her. "Candis," he began, his voice low, almost reverent. "I know I've said I'm sorry, but I need you to know I mean it. I never meant to hurt you." She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his, and for a moment she saw the man behind the CEO, who had faltered in a Greenwich Village bar, who had whispered her name in a haze of bourbon and longing. "Sorry doesn't undo it, Felix," she said, her tone steady but laced with pain. "You were my boss, someone I trusted, and now I'm in your penthouse feeling like I've lost a part of myself." He winced, the words cutting deeper than he'd expected. "I know," he said, sitting across from her, his hands clasped as if to keep himself from reaching out. "But I'm not going to let you go through this alone. I'll make whatever you need, time, space, a doctor, happen. Just tell me how to help." Candis's fingers tightened around the mug, the warmth grounding her. "What I need," she said, her voice softening, "is for no one to know. Not your bored friends or gossip columns that follow your every move. If this gets out, Felix, it's not just my reputation at stake. It's yours." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I swear, Candis, this stays between us." The promise hung in the air, a fragile thread binding them in their shared secret. Felix was true to his word, moving with a quiet efficiency that belied the turmoil in his eyes. He arranged for a private doctor to visit that afternoon, a discreet woman named Dr. Carmela, who arrived with a medical bag and a professional smile. Candis endured the examination in silence, her pride warring with the necessity of it. The doctor's verdict was simple: rest, hydration, and time. But the unspoken truth lingered. Candis had crossed a line, and the consequences were hers to bear. Felix also hired a small team of caregivers, women in crisp uniforms, who moved through the penthouse with practiced efficiency. They brought shopping bags filled with clothes, soft cashmere sweaters, tailored jeans, and silk scarves that spoke of Felix's attention to detail. Candis couldn't help but marvel at the extravagance, even as she resented its necessity. She said, "You didn't have to do all this," one morning, holding up a navy dress that felt like a whisper against her skin. "I wanted to," Felix replied, his voice soft but firm. "You deserve to feel comfortable, Candis, after everything." His words stirred something in her, a flicker of warmth she quickly smothered. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not when their boundaries were so blurred. Yet as the days passed, she found herself noticing the small things, the way Felix lingered in the doorway, checking on her before heading to the office, the way he'd leave a plate of fruit on the counter, sliced with a precision that spoke of care, the way his laughter, rare and unguarded, filled the penthouse with a warmth she hadn't expected. One evening, as the city skyline blazed with the fiery hues of sunset, Candis stood by the window, her reflection a stark contrast against the glass. She was a black woman, in a world that often judged her before knowing her, and now she was tethered to a man whose privilege shielded him from such scrutiny. Yet in this moment, Felix was not the untouchable CEO. He was a man wrestling with his own guilt, his own desires, and the weight of a night that had changed them both. "Candis," he said, stepping closer, his voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. "I know you're still angry, and I don't blame you. But I need you to know that I see you not just as my secretary, but as someone extraordinary. You've always been the one who keeps me grounded, who makes sense of the chaos. And now, I don't know how to navigate this without you." She turned to face him, her heart a battleground of emotions. "Felix, you don't get to say that," she said, her voice trembling with defiance and longing. "You don't get to make this feel like something it's not. What happened was a mistake, and I'm trying to hold myself together while you play the hero." His eyes darkened, not with anger but with a quiet resolve. Maybe it was a mistake, he said, but it doesn't change how I feel. I've admired you for so long, Candis, your strength, your brilliance. I've messed this up, but I'm not going anywhere. The words hung between them, a confession that felt reckless and inevitable. Candis wanted to push him away, to retreat to the safety of her anger. But there was something in his gaze, a vulnerability that mirrored her own, that made her pause. For the first time, she wondered if the night they'd shared was not just a lapse, but a spark of something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. As the city hummed below, a restless symphony of ambition and dreams, Candis felt the weight of their secrets settle into her bones. She was no longer just Candis Florenciano, the unflappable secretary. She was a woman caught in the orbit of Felix Evans, and the path ahead was as uncertain as the city lights stretching into the horizon. With its sleek lines and panoramic views, the Upper East Side penthouse had become a gilded cage for Candis Florenciano. Days had passed since the fateful night, yet the air between her and Felix Evans remained charged, a delicate balance of unspoken truths and guarded glances. The ache in her body had faded, replaced by a more profound unease, a fear that their secret, like a fragile glass sculpture, could shatter with a single misstep. Candis, a black woman who had carved her place in the cutthroat world of Manhattan's corporate elite, was unaccustomed to feeling so exposed. Yet here she was, tethered to Felix's world, her pride warring with the necessity of his care. Felix moved through the penthouse with a quiet intensity, his presence both a comfort and a challenge. He was meticulous in making her stay bearable, fresh flowers on the dining table, a playlist of jazz that echoed her taste, and a private chef who prepared meals tailored to her preferences. Each gesture was a silent plea for forgiveness, a bridge to mend their rift. But Candis kept her distance, her heart a fortress she wasn't ready to open. She couldn't afford to blur the lines further, not when the stakes were so high. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floor, Candis sat at the breakfast bar, sipping chamomile tea. The caregivers Felix had hired bustled quietly in the background, their presence a reminder of his wealth and influence. They had delivered another batch of clothes, designer pieces, that felt like an extension of Felix's world, not hers. She wore a soft, emerald sweater, its fabric a caress against her skin, but it only deepened her sense of displacement. This wasn't her life, and she wasn't sure she wanted it to be. Felix entered his suit impeccable, his blonde hair catching the light like burnished gold. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but cautious, as if testing the waters. "Did you sleep okay?" "Well enough," Candis replied, her tone neutral. She studied him, noting the faint shadows under his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. He was carrying his own burdens, she realized. Burdens she didn't fully understand. "You're heading to the office soon." He nodded, pouring himself a coffee. "There is a big meeting with the board today. We're finalizing the merger with Montano Wines." He hesitated, then added that I could use your input on the numbers, Candis. You always catch what I miss. The compliment, small as it was, stirred something in her, a flicker of the pride she took in her work. For 2 years, she had been his right hand, the one who anticipated his needs, who smoothed the edges of his ambition. But now, that role felt tainted, overshadowed by their shared intimacy. "I'm not your secretary right now, Felix," she said, her voice firm. "I'm just trying to figure this out." He set his mug down, his eyes searching hers. "I know," he said softly. "But you're still you, Candis, the most intelligent person I know. I don't want to lose that, lose you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Candis felt a pull, a dangerous current that threatened to sweep her under. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his care was more than guilt. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when the world outside was waiting to judge them, her a black woman from Brooklyn, him a white heir to a corporate empire. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed, and the screen lit up with Beatrice's name. Candis excused herself, stepping onto the balcony, where the city's hum was a comforting backdrop. "Hey, B," she said, forcing a brightness she didn't feel. "Girl, you sound off?" Beatrice's voice crackled from Los Angeles, sharp and perceptive. "What's going on? And don't give me that work stuff nonsense. I heard a man's voice last time we talked. Spill it." Candis gripped the railing, the cool metal grounding her. "It's complicated," she said, her voice low. "I'm just dealing with some things." Complicated how Beatrice pressed her tone, a mix of concern and curiosity. "You're in New York, living your fancy corporate life, and now you're dodging me. Come on, Candis. You know I'm not letting this go." Candis sighed, her breath misting in the morning air. Beatrice was her anchor, the friend who had seen her through heartbreak and triumphs from their high school days in Brooklyn to now. But how could she explain this, a night that had unraveled her carefully ordered world, a secret that could ruin everything? "I'm fine, B," she lied. "Just tired. Work's been intense." Beatrice wasn't convinced, but she let it slide, her voice softening. "Okay, but you'd better call me when you can talk. I'm flying to New York next month for a gig. We're getting milkshakes at that diner in Williamsburg, no excuses." Candis smiled, the memory of their teenage rituals, a fleeting comfort. "Deal," she said, ending the call. But as she turned back to the penthouse, she caught Felix watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. The weight of their secret pressed harder, a shadow that followed her every step. As the days unfolded, Candis found herself navigating a delicate balance. The caregivers, though professional, were a constant reminder of her vulnerability. One, a young woman named Lila, asked too many questions about Felix and why Candis was staying in his penthouse. "You're not his girlfriend, are you?" Lila said one afternoon, her tone teasing but pointed. Candis's cheeks burned. "No," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the air. "I'm his secretary. That's all you need to know." But Lila's curiosity lingered, a spark that could ignite a fire of gossip, if not extinguished. Candis made a mental note to speak to Felix to ensure the caregivers understood the need for discretion. Felix, meanwhile, was grappling with his own battles. At Evans Enterprises, whispers had begun to circulate, subtle glances from colleagues, and a board member's comment about his recent distraction. He buried himself in work, but Candis's absence was a void he couldn't ignore. She had been his compass, her sharp mind and steady presence, guiding him through the chaos of corporate life. With her confined to his penthouse, he felt adrift, torn between duty and desire. One evening, as rain streaked the penthouse windows, Felix returned home early, his suit damp from the downpour. He found Candis curled on the couch, a book in her lap, her dark curls spilling over her shoulders. The sight of her, so unguarded, sent a pang through him. "Candis," he said, his voice soft, "can we talk?" She looked up, her eyes wary but curious. "About what?" "About us," he said, sitting beside her close enough to feel her warmth, but careful not to cross the invisible line between them. "I know you're still processing everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm here, not just because of what happened, but because I care about you. I always have." Candis's heart quickened his words, a melody she wasn't ready to hear. "Felix, you can't just say things like that," she said, her voice trembling. "You're my boss. This, whatever this is, it's messy, and I'm trying to keep it from ruining everything." He leaned closer, his eyes locking with hers. "Maybe it's messy," he said, "but it's real. I've spent years building walls, Candis, keeping people at arm's length. But you've always seen through me. That night, as wrong as it was, it showed me something I can't ignore." She stood, needing distance, her heart a battlefield of longing and fear. Don't. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't make this more complicated than it already is. But as she walked away, the rain tapping a mournful rhythm against the glass, Candis felt the pull of his words, the dangerous possibility of something more. The city outside was a maze of secrets, and theirs was only beginning to unravel. The autumn air in Manhattan carried a crisp edge, a reminder of the fleeting days as October painted the city in hues of amber and crimson. Candis Florenciano stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Felix Evans's Upper East Side penthouse, her gaze lost in the restless pulse of New York below. The city was a tapestry of ambition and dreams, but it felt like a labyrinth closing on Candis. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful night at the Velvet Haven, and though the physical ache had faded, a new unease had taken root. A quiet tremor in her body, a whisper of change she couldn't ignore. Candis, a black woman, whose strength had carried her through the corporate jungle, was no stranger to challenges. As Felix's secretary, she had navigated boardroom politics, managed his chaotic schedule, and anticipated his needs with an intuition that bordered on artistry. But now her world was shifting in ways she hadn't expected. Mornings brought nausea. Her temper flared at the slightest provocations, and a strange fatigue clung to her like a second skin. She told herself it was stress, the weight of their secret, the strain of living in Felix's gilded world. But deep down, a nagging suspicion grew, one she wasn't ready to face. Felix had been a constant presence, and his care was both a comfort and a complication. He returned each evening from Evans Enterprises, his tailored suits slightly rumpled, his blue eyes shadowed with guilt and determination. He didn't press her, didn't demand forgiveness, but his actions spoke louder than words. A tray of her favorite pastries left on the counter, a soft cashmere blanket draped over her when she dozed on the couch, a quiet offer to cancel meetings so he could stay with her. Each gesture chipped away at her defenses, stirring a warmth she fought to suppress. That morning, as sunlight spilled across the penthouse, Candis sat at the breakfast bar, her fingers wrapped around a mug of ginger tea, a remedy for the nausea that had become her unwelcome companion. Felix entered his presence, filling the room like a quiet storm. "You're up early," he said, his voice warm but cautious, as if navigating a minefield and feeling any better. She nodded, avoiding his gaze a little. "The tea helps." Her voice was clipped a shield against the vulnerability threatening to surface. She couldn't afford to let him in, not when her world was teetering on the edge of something monumental. Felix poured himself a coffee, his movements deliberate. He said, "I've got a meeting with Montano Wines today," leaning against the counter. "But I can reschedule if you need me here. Just say the word." The offer, genuine and unassuming, sent a pang through her. "I'm fine, Felix," she said, her tone sharper than intended. "You don't need to babysit me. I'll be back in Brooklyn soon, and we can move on." His expression faltered, a flicker of hurt crossing his features. "Candis, I'm not trying to trap you here. I want to make sure you're okay after everything." The words hung between them, heavy with the memory of their shared mistake. Candis wanted to lash out to remind him that everything was his doing, but the truth was more complicated. She had stayed that night, had let herself be drawn into his orbit. The blame wasn't his alone, and that realization gnawed at her. Later that day, alone in the penthouse, Candis made a decision. She slipped out to a pharmacy in Midtown, her heart pounding as she purchased a pregnancy test. The cashier's casual smile felt like a spotlight, and she hurried back, the small box burning a hole in her purse. In the privacy of the penthouse bathroom, she followed the instructions with trembling hands, her breath shallow as she waited for the result. When the 2 pink lines appeared, her world tilted. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, a seismic shift she wasn't prepared for. Panic surged, followed by a fierce resolve. She couldn't stay at Evans Enterprises with this secret growing inside her. The whispers, the judgment, the inevitable scrutiny of a black woman entangled with her white CEO boss. It would be unbearable. She had to leave to protect herself and the life she now carried. The decision crystallized as she packed a small bag, her movements mechanical, her mind racing with plans to resign quietly and disappear into the anonymity of the city. Candis returned to the office the next morning for the first time since that night. The glass tower of Evans Enterprises loomed over Midtown, its sleek facade a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. She wore a tailored blazer and skirt, her armor against the world, but her heart was stormy. She found Felix in his corner office, the city sprawling beyond his desk like a kingdom at his feet. He looked up, surprise and relief flickering in his eyes. "Candis, you're back," he said, standing. "I was thinking you'd never leave the penthouse." She forced a smile, her hands clutching a resignation letter she'd drafted the night before. "Felix, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm resigning effective next month." His face fell, the warmth in his eyes replaced by confusion. "Resigning? Why, Candis? You're the best secretary I've ever had. The company needs you. I need you." The words stung a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. "It's not about the job," she said, her voice wavering. "It's about me. I need a fresh start somewhere else. This isn't working anymore." Felix stepped closer, his gaze searching hers. "Is this about what happened, Candis? We can figure this out together. You don't have to run." "I'm not running," she snapped, her composure cracking. "I'm doing what's best for me." She turned to leave, her bag slipping from her shoulder in haste. A small plastic case. The pregnancy test fell to the floor, landing with a soft thud that echoed like thunder. Felix's eyes widened as he bent to pick it up, his fingers trembling as he read the label. "Candis," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you pregnant?" She froze, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might drown out the city. There was no escaping now, no hiding the truth. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "And it's yours." The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of their shared secret, now a tangible force. Felix stared at the test, his expression a mix of shock and something more profound, something Candis couldn't name. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice raw. "A day," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I was going to handle it myself, Felix. I didn't want to drag you into this to ruin your life." "Ruin my life," he echoed, stepping closer, the test still in his hand. "Candis, you're not dragging me into anything. This is my responsibility too, and I'm not letting you face it alone." She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "You don't understand, Felix. I'm a black woman, your secretary. If this gets out, the world will tear us apart. Your board, your family, the press. They'll make it a scandal. I can't do that to you or to myself." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Let them talk," he said, his voice steady with a conviction that surprised her. "I don't care about the scandal, Candis. I care about you. And if you're carrying my child, I care about them too." The words hung between them, a lifeline in the storm. Candis wanted to pull away, to retreat to the safety of her independence, but Felix's gaze held her, a beacon of something she wasn't ready to trust. The city outside hummed with its relentless energy, but in that moment, it was just the two of them, bound by a truth that would change everything. The office of Evans Enterprises was a cathedral of ambition, its glass walls reflecting the glittering promise of Manhattan's skyline. but it felt like a battlefield for Candis Florenciano standing in Felix Evans's corner office. The pregnancy test lay discarded on his desk, a small plastic sentinel that had shattered the fragile equilibrium of their lives. Candis, her dark eyes blazing with defiance and fear, faced Felix, whose expression was a storm of emotions, shock, resolve, and a quiet intensity that unnerved her. The revelation of her pregnancy had stripped away the last of their pretenses, leaving them raw and exposed in the harsh light of truth. Felix stepped closer, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. "Candis," he said, his voice low and fervent, "you don't have to do this alone. I meant what I said. I'm in this with you." She shook her head, her curls swaying with the motion a barrier against his words. "Felix, you don't get it," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her fears. "This isn't just about us. It's about the world out there, your world. You're Felix Evans, CEO of a wine empire, a white man with a legacy to protect. I'm your black secretary, a nobody in their eyes. If this gets out, they'll crucify us. They'll say I trapped you, that I'm after your money. I can't live with that." His jaw tightened, a flicker of anger crossing his features, not at her, but at the world she described. "Let them say what they want," he said, his voice rising with a passion she hadn't heard before. "I don't care about their gossip, Candis. I care about you, about our child. And I won't let you walk away because of what people might think." Candis's heart raced, torn between the safety of retreat and the dangerous pull of his conviction. "It's not just one child," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I went to a clinic yesterday after the test. It's triplets, Felix. 3 lives all tied to that night." The word triplets hung in the air, a revelation that seemed to shift the very gravity of the room. Felix's eyes widened, his breath catching as the weight of it settled over him. "Triplets." He repeated, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. He took a step back, running a hand through his blonde hair, his mind racing to process the enormity of it. 3 children, a future he hadn't dared to imagine, now tethered to the woman who had been his anchor for years. Candis watched him, her heart a battlefield of hope and fear. "That's why I have to leave," she said, her voice steadying as she clung to her resolve. "I can't stay here, Felix. I can't be the reason your life falls apart. I'll raise them alone in Brooklyn, away from your world." "No," he said, his voice firm, almost commanding. He closed the distance between them, his hands hovering near her shoulders, as if afraid to touch her. "Candis, you're not doing this alone. I've spent years building a life that looks perfect on paper, but is empty without meaning. You've always been the one who made it real, the one who challenged me, who saw me for more than my name. And now, knowing you're carrying my children, I can't let you go." She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his, seeking the truth behind his words. "Why, Felix?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. "Why does this matter to you? Is it guilt, duty, or something else?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting hers again, raw and unguarded. "It's more than guilt," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've admired you since the day you walked into this office. Candis, your strength, your fire, the way you never let me get away with anything. I was too afraid to admit it, to cross that line. But that night, it wasn't just a mistake. It was me wanting you, even if I didn't know how to say it." The confession hung between them, a fragile bridge over the chasm of their differences. Candis felt her defenses waver, the walls she'd built, trembling under the weight of his honesty. She wanted to dismiss it, to call it a fleeting passion born of alcohol and vulnerability. But there was a truth in his eyes, a longing that echoed the spark she'd felt that night, the one she'd buried beneath layers of anger and pride. "Felix," she said, her voice trembling, "you can't just say things like that and expect me to believe them. You're my boss. This us It's impossible. The world won't let it be anything else. Then we'll make our own world. He said, his voice steady, with a conviction that sent a shiver down her spine. Marry me, Candis. Let me be there for you, for our children. I know it's fast. I know it's messy. But I want this. I want you. The proposal struck her like a lightning bolt, electrifying and terrifying. Marriage. To Felix Evans. The man whose name graced magazine covers, whose family owned estates in the Hamptons. The idea was as absurd as it was intoxicating. She stepped back, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her chest. She said, "You don't mean that," her voice barely above a whisper. "You're just trying to fix this to make it right." He said, "I'm not trying to fix anything," his voice rising urgently. "I'm trying to build something. With you, Candis. I've spent too long hiding behind my name, my title. But with you, I'm just Felix, a man who's falling for you, who wants to be a father to our children." The words hung in the air, a melody she wasn't ready to hear. She turned away, her eyes fixed on the city beyond the glass, its towering spires a reminder of the world waiting to judge them. "I need time," she said, her voice breaking. "This is too much, Felix. I need to think." He nodded, his expression a mix of hope and restraint. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here, Candis, whenever you're ready." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Candis returned to the penthouse, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She sat on the balcony, the city's hum, a distant lullaby, and let herself imagine it, a life with Felix, a family with their triplets. It was a dream that felt both impossible and inevitable, a pull she couldn't ignore. But fear lingered, a shadow cast by the world's expectations, by the whispers that would follow a black woman and a white CEO bound by scandal. That evening, Felix returned, his presence quieter now, as if he sensed the storm within her. He didn't press, didn't ask for answers. Instead, he sat beside her, the silence between them, a canvas for unspoken possibilities. As the city lights flickered to life, Candis felt a shift, a spark of hope, fragile but undeniable, that maybe, just maybe, they could face the world together. Once a sanctuary of quiet tension, the Upper East Side penthouse now hummed with a new undercurrent, a fragile hope woven through the threads of Candis Florenciano's resolve. The revelation of her pregnancy with triplets had shifted the air between her and Felix Evans, transforming their shared secret into a promise tentative but undeniable. Candis, her dark eyes reflecting the city's restless glow, stood at the precipice of a decision that could redefine her life. Felix's proposal, marriage, a future together, lingered like a melody she couldn't shake its notes, both exhilarating and terrifying. Yet, as the autumn leaves swirled outside, a new challenge loomed, the weight of family expectations, a force as formidable as the Manhattan skyline. Felix had insisted on taking Candis to meet his parents, a decision that filled her with dread. The Evans family was a dynasty. Their name was synonymous with wealth and influence, and their estate in the Hamptons was a testament to generations of privilege. Candis, a black woman who had clawed her way up from Brooklyn's modest streets, felt the chasm between their worlds more acutely than ever. She stood before the penthouse mirror, smoothing the lines of a tailored emerald dress. Felix had chosen its fabric, a soft embrace against her skin. The reflection staring back was poised, but beneath the surface, her heart raced with questions. Would they see her as an interloper, a scandal waiting to unravel their legacy? Felix appeared behind her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. His blonde hair caught the morning light, and his blue eyes held a quiet determination. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "They're going to love you, Candis. I know it." She turned her gaze, meeting his with skepticism and longing. Felix, they're your parents, not mine. They're expecting someone from their world who fits their idea of an Evans. I'm your secretary, a black woman carrying 3 of your children. Will they welcome me with open arms? He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, a touch that sent a shiver through her. They'll see what I see, he said, his voice steady. A woman who's brilliant, fierce, and stronger than anyone I know. If they don't, I'll make them. His conviction was a lifeline, but Candis couldn't shake the fear that coiled in her chest. The drive to the Hamptons was a blur of golden fields and windswept dunes, the ocean's roar a distant echo as they approached the Evans estate. The mansion loomed like a castle, its white columns and manicured lawns a stark contrast to the gritty vibrancy of Brooklyn. Felix's hand rested on hers as they stepped out of the car, a silent promise that he was with her no matter what lay ahead. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old money. Felix's parents, Eleanor and Charles Evans, greeted them in the drawing room, expressing a study in controlled civility. Eleanor, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon-eyed Candis, with a cool appraisal, while Charles, his face etched with the lines of a life spent commanding, offered a curt nod. With its crystal chandelier and antique furniture, the room felt like a stage, and Candis was acutely aware of her role as the outsider. Felix, darling. Eleanor began, her voice smooth, but edged with frost. You mentioned an important matter. Is this about the merger with Montana Wines? Felix's jaw tightened, his hand still holding Candis. No, mother, he said, his tone firm. This is about Candis. She's pregnant with our triplets, and I've asked her to marry me. The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with unspoken judgments. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her gaze flicking to Candis, taking in her dark skin, poised demeanor, the quiet strength that belied her nerves. Pregnant, she said, her voice barely concealing her shock. With triplets. Felix, this is unexpected. And you, Miss Florenciano, you're his secretary, correct? Candis lifted her chin, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. Yes, Mrs. Evans. I've worked for Felix for 2 years. I didn't plan for this, but it's happening and I'm prepared to face it. Charles leaned forward, his eyes sharp, prepared to face it. This isn't just about you, young lady. This is about our family's name, our legacy. This scandal could damage Felix's reputation and the company's standing. Have you considered that Candis felt the sting of his words, but she held her ground? I've considered everything, she said, her voice clear. I offered to leave to raise the children on my own, but Felix insisted on being part of their lives and mine. Felix squeezed her hand, his voice rising with a passion that filled the room. This isn't a scandal, Father. It's a family, my family. Candis is the woman I want to build a life with. She's been the heart of Evans Enterprises, and she'll be the heart of our home. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you this is my choice. Eleanor's lips pursed, her eyes flicking between them. Felix, you've always been impulsive, but this is reckless. Miss Florenciano, you seem capable, but you must understand our world. The press, the board, our social circle, they'll tear this apart. A black woman, a secretary marrying into our family. The scrutiny will be relentless. The words cut deep, a reminder of the barriers Candis had faced her entire life. She wanted to retreat to shield herself from their judgment, but Felix's grip on her hand anchored her. I'm not afraid of scrutiny, she said, her voice steady with a fire she hadn't known she possessed. I've faced it before, and I'll face it again, but I won't let it define me or my children. Felix's eyes shone with pride, a silent vow that he was with her. Mother, Father, he said, his voice unwavering. I love Candis. I've loved her for longer than I've admitted even to myself. These children are a gift, and I will be there for them for her, whether you approve or not." The room fell silent again, the tension a palpable force. Charles stood, his expression unreadable, as he paced to the window, the ocean stretching beyond like a canvas of possibilities. "You've made your choice, Felix," he said, his voice heavy. "But don't expect this to be easy. The world isn't kind to choices like this." Candis felt a pang of doubt, but Felix's presence beside her was a steadying force. As they left the mansion, the weight of the encounter lingered, but so did a spark of hope. Felix had fought for her for them, and at that moment, she saw him not as the CEO, but as a man willing to defy his world for hers. Back in the penthouse, the city's lights flickered like stars, a reminder of the journey ahead. Candis stood on the balcony, her hands resting on her still flat stomach, the reality of the triplets sinking in. Felix joined her, his arm brushing hers, a silent question in his touch. "We'll face it together," he said, his voice a promise that wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She turned to him, her dark eyes meeting his, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe it. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but with Felix by her side, she felt a flicker of courage, a spark that could light the way. The pulse of New York was unrelenting, a symphony of ambition that echoed through the glass canyons of Manhattan. For Candis Florenciano, now 5 months pregnant with triplets, the city was both a home and a battleground. Her life had shifted irrevocably since that night in Felix Evans' penthouse, and the following proposal had set them on a path fraught with promise and peril. The confrontation with Felix's parents had been a trial by fire, but it was only the beginning. As autumn deepened into winter, the whispers of the city's elite began to swirl, a storm of gossip that threatened to engulf them both. Candis stood in the penthouse, her reflection shimmering in the mirrored walls of the elevator, as she prepared for a rare public appearance. Felix had insisted she accompany him to a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a glittering event attended by New York's power players. Her navy gown, chosen by Felix, hugged her growing curves, its silk folds a quiet rebellion against the world's scrutiny. She was no longer just his secretary. She was the woman carrying his children, the one he had chosen to stand beside. Yet the weight of that choice pressed against her, a reminder of the eyes that would judge her tonight, her black skin, her humble roots, her place in Felix's world. Felix appeared at her side, his tuxedo accentuating his broad shoulders, his blue eyes alight with a mix of pride and nerves. "You're stunning," he said, his voice a soft caress that sent a warmth through her. "Tonight we show them who we are together." She managed a smile, her heart a tangle of hope and fear. "Felix, they're not going to see us," she said, her voice low. "They're going to see a scandal, a black secretary, and a white CEO defying their rules. Are you ready for that?" He took her hand, his touch a steady anchor. He said, "I'm ready for anything, as long as you're with me," his voice firm. "Let them talk. We're building something real, Candis, something worth fighting for." The gala was a spectacle of opulence, the Met's grand halls aglow with chandeliers and the hum of conversation. Candis felt the weight of every glance, the subtle arch of brows, the whispered speculations that followed them. Felix's arm around her waist was a shield, but it couldn't block the sting of a socialite's murmured comment. "She's his secretary, isn't she? How ambitious." Or the pointed stare of a board member who had once praised her efficiency but now saw her as a liability. Felix navigated the crowd easily, his charm disarming even the most skeptical. He introduced Candis as his fiancée, his voice ringing with pride, but the word felt like a gauntlet thrown down. She stood tall, her smile a mask of grace, but inside, she was a storm of doubt. Could she belong in this world, where her presence challenged their norms? Could she protect her children from the judgment that awaited them? The storm broke when a rival executive, Richard Langley, approached them, his smile sharp as a blade. Felix, quite surprised, said, his eyes flicking to Candis. "I didn't realize Evans Enterprises was branching out into unconventional partnerships." Felix's grip on her hand tightened, his voice cold. "Careful, Richard. Candis is my fiancée, and she's worth more to me than any deal you're chasing." Langley's laugh was a low, mocking sound. "Oh, I'm sure, but the board might not see it that way, or the press. You know how they love a good story." He walked away, leaving a venom trail lingering in the air. Candis felt her resolve waver, but Felix's presence steadied her. "Ignore him," he said, his voice low and fierce. "He's just trying to rattle us. We're stronger than that." But the whispers followed them, a relentless tide growing louder each day. By morning, the gossip columns were ablaze with speculation headlines, questioning Felix's judgment, hinting at scandal, casting Candis as an opportunist. The pressure seeped into Evans Enterprises, where board members began questioning Felix's focus, their doubts fueled by Langley's calculated leaks. Candis, confined to the penthouse, as the media storm raged, felt the weight of it all. She sat by the window, her hands resting on her belly, where the triplets stirred, a reminder of the future she was fighting for. Felix returned from the office one evening, his face etched with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with determination. "I'm handling it," he said, sitting beside her. "I've called a press conference tomorrow. We're going to tell our story, Candis, our way." Her heart skipped, fear and hope colliding. "Felix, are you sure? Once we go public, there's no going back. The world will know everything." He took her hand, his touch a vow. "I want them to know," he said. "I want them to see you, the woman I love, the mother of my children. Let them judge us. We'll show them what we're made of." The words, spoken with such certainty, ignited a spark in Candis. She had spent her life proving herself, defying expectations, and now, with Felix by her side, she felt a surge of courage. The city outside was a crucible, but together they could forge something unbreakable. A love that defied the storms, a family that would stand tall against the world. The winter sun hung low over Central Park, casting a golden veil across its snow-dusted paths and bare-branched trees. Candis Florenciano stood before a full-length mirror in a suite at the plaza, her reflection a vision in ivory lace. The wedding gown, a delicate creation of silk and tulle, hugged her now pronounced curves, the swell of her belly a proud testament to the triplets she carried. At 7 months pregnant, she was a portrait of strength and grace, her dark skin radiant against the gown's soft glow. Yet beneath the poise, her heart fluttered with nerves and anticipation. Today she would marry Felix Evans, the man who had upended her world and, against all odds, claimed her heart. The journey to this moment had been a tempest fraught with the disapproval of Felix's family and the biting scrutiny of New York's elite. But the press conference Felix had orchestrated, a bold declaration of their love and commitment, had shifted the narrative. Ever hungry for a story, the city had begun to see them not as a scandal, but as a romance that defied convention. Once a shadow in Felix's corporate empire, Candis was now a beacon, her strength countering his privilege. And Felix, the white CEO, who had once seemed untouchable, had revealed a vulnerability that made him all the more human. The suite buzzed with quiet activity. Beatrice, Candis's best friend from Los Angeles, adjusted the veil with a grin, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Look at you, girl," she said, her voice warm with pride, from secretary to queen of Central Park. "Felix doesn't know how lucky he is." Candis laughed, the sound easing the knot in her chest. He better know, she teased, her gaze softening as she thought of Felix. The past months had been a revelation, a slow unfurling of her heart as she discovered the man beneath the CEO. His care had been unwavering, late-night talks on the penthouse balcony, gentle touches to her belly as he whispered to their unborn children, moments of laughter that banished the shadows of doubt. What had begun as a mistake had blossomed into something real, something she dared to call love. The door opened, and Felix's sister Clara stepped in, her auburn hair catching the light. Initially skeptical of Candis, Clara had become an unexpected ally, her warmth a bridge between Candis and the Evans family. "You're breathtaking," Clara said, her voice sincere. "Felix is pacing like a nervous schoolboy out there. I've never seen him like this." Candis smiled, her nerves settling. "He's not the only one," she admitted, her hand resting on her belly, where a faint kick reminded her of the lives they were building together. "I hope I don't trip walking down that aisle." Beatrice snorted. "Trip, girl. You're gonna glide like royalty. Now let's get you to that altar before Felix wears a hole in the grass." The ceremony was held in the park's Bethesda terrace, its arches adorned with white roses and fairy lights that twinkled against the winter dusk. The guests, family, close friends, and a few trusted colleagues, sat in rows of velvet chairs, their faces a mix of curiosity and warmth. Candis stepped forward, her arm linked with Beatrice's, her eyes locking on Felix at the altar. He stood tall, in a tailored tuxedo, his blonde hair gleaming, his blue eyes bright with a love that took her breath away. The crowd faded, the city's hum, a distant echo, as she walked toward him, each step a vow to embrace this new chapter. The officiant's words were a soft melody, weaving their promises into the crisp air. Felix took Candis's hands, his touch steady and warm. Candis said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "You've been my strength, challenge, and heart. I promise to love you, stand by you, and fight for you and our children, no matter what the world throws at us. You are my home." Tears pricked Candis's eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Felix, you saw me when I felt invisible, loved me when I doubted myself. I promise to be your partner, your equal, to build a stronger family with you than any storm. I love you." The exchange of rings was a quiet ritual. The gold bands symbolized their defiance and devotion. As they kissed, the crowd erupted in applause, the sound mingling with the rustle of leaves and the distant song of a street musician. Candis felt a warmth spread through her, a certainty that this Felix, their triplets, their love was worth every battle they'd fought. The reception celebrated light and laughter in a glass-walled pavilion overlooking the park. Candis and Felix moved through the crowd, their hands entwined, their smiles a shared secret. Beatrice toasted them with a speech that had the guests roaring with laughter, recounting Candis's teenage dreams of love and her stubborn refusal to settle for less. Clara raised a glass to their future, her words a quiet apology for her family's initial resistance. Even Felix's parents, Eleanor and Charles, offered cautious smiles, their presence a fragile olive branch. As the night deepened, Candis and Felix stole a moment alone on the pavilion's terrace, the city skyline a glittering backdrop. He wrapped his arms around her, his warmth a shield against the winter chill. "Mrs. Evans," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "How does it feel?" She laughed, the sound soft and free. "Like I'm dreaming," she said, turning to face him. "But it's real. You, me, our babies. This is our life now." He kissed her forehead, his eyes shining. "It's just the beginning," he said, "and I wouldn't trade it for anything." In that moment, Candis felt her heart open fully, the last of her walls crumbling. She had been a woman defined by her strength and independence, But with Felix she discovered a new kind of power, a fierce and tender love, a partnership that could weather any storm. As they returned to the celebration, the music swelling, and the stars above mirroring the lights below, Candis knew she was no longer just Candis Florenciano. She was Candis Evans, a woman who had found her place in a world she had once thought beyond her reach. The Connecticut countryside stretched wide and serene, a canvas of rolling hills and ancient oaks that seemed to whisper of permanence. 3 years had passed since the wedding in Central Park, and the life Candis and Felix Evans had built was a testament to their resilience. Their home, a sprawling estate with white shutters and a wraparound porch, stood as a sanctuary from the city's chaos. The backyard alive with the laughter of their 3 sons, Carl, Corden, and Kane, echoed with a joy that had once seemed impossible. Candis, now a woman whose strength had been tempered by love, stood at the edge of the garden, her dark eyes soft as she watched her boys chase a soccer ball, their blonde curls and brown skin, a perfect blend of their parents. Felix, his once impeccable suits, traded for jeans and a sweater, joined the boys, his laughter ringing out as he scooped Kane into his arms, spinning him until the toddler squealed. Candis smiled, her heart swelling with a love that had deepened with each passing day. The man who had once been her untouchable boss was now her partner, her anchor, the father who read bedtime stories with exaggerated voices and built tree houses with meticulous care. Their journey had been a crucible forging a family that defied the world's expectations. The early months after the wedding had been a whirlwind. The triplets' arrival, 3 perfect boys born in a Manhattan hospital under a spring sky, had transformed their lives. Candis feared motherhood's chaos, the weight of raising children in a world that might judge them for their mixed heritage. But Felix had been her rock, waking for midnight feedings, soothing cries with a patience that surprised her, and advocating fiercely for their family. Once hungry for scandal, the press had softened their story now, a tale of love, triumphant, a narrative Candis had helped shape through her new role as a part-time consultant for Evans Enterprises. The company, too, had evolved. Felix had stepped back from the relentless pace of CEO life, delegating to trusted lieutenants to be present for his family. By leveraging her years as his secretary, Candis had become a strategic advisor, her insights shaping the company's expansion into sustainable wines. Their partnership extended beyond the home, a seamless blend of love and ambition that made them unstoppable. Yet the scars of their early battles lingered, whispers at galas, subtle slights from old money acquaintances. But they faced them together, their love a shield against the world. One afternoon, as the boys napped and the house settled into a rare, quiet, Candis and Felix sat on the porch, a pitcher of lemonade between them. The air was warm, scented with lilacs and fresh-cut grass, and the distant hum of a lawnmower was a soft counterpoint to their conversation. "Do you ever think about it?" Candis asked, her voice soft, her hand resting on his. "How did we get here from that night in Greenwich Village to this?" Felix's blue eyes met hers, a smile tugging at his lips. "Every day," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I think about how I almost lost you, how I was too afraid to admit what you meant to me. But that night, as messy as it was, it gave me you, us. Carl, Corden, Kane. I'd do it all again. Candis, to be here with you." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, his warmth grounding her. She admitted, "I was so scared back then," her voice barely above a whisper, "terrified of what people would say, of what it meant to love you. But you showed me I didn't have to be afraid. You fought for us, Felix, and I'll never stop loving you for that." He kissed her temple, his lips a soft promise. "And I'll never stop fighting he said. For you, for our boys, for the life we've built. You're my heart, Candis, and they're my world. The years had not been without challenges. Though softened by their grandson's charm, Felix's parents still held a cautious distance, their approval fragile. Candis's family in Brooklyn, initially stunned by her whirlwind romance, had embraced Felix, their warmth a balm to her soul. Now, a regular visitor, Beatrice filled their home with laughter, and her stories of Los Angeles adventures delighted the boys. The world outside their Connecticut haven remained complex, its judgments a constant undercurrent. But within these walls, they were untouchable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Candis and Felix gathered their sons for dinner. The table was a riot of chatter. Carl's tales of a caterpillar he'd found Cordon's insistence on extra mashed potatoes, Cain's gleeful spoon banging. Candis watched Felix, his face alight with joy, and felt a profound gratitude bordering on reverence. This was their legacy, not the wealth of Evans Enterprises, but the love that bound them, the family they had forged against all odds. The night ended with the boys tucked into bed, their small forms curled beneath quilts, dreams dancing in their sighs. Candis and Felix stood in the doorway, their hands entwined, the quiet a canvas for their shared history. "We did it," Candis whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We made it through." Felix pulled her close, his lips brushing hers. He said, "We didn't just make it," his voice a vow. "We built something extraordinary, and it's only going to get better." As they stepped into the night, the stars above mirroring the lights of their home, Candis knew he was right. Their love, born in a moment of chaos, had grown into a force that could withstand any storm. They were no longer just a secretary and her boss, a black woman and a white man defying the world. Candis and Felix Evans were parents and partners, a family forged in fire and love. Dear reader, the story of Candis and Felix is more than a tale of love. It's a testament to resilience, to the power of defying expectations and building a future on your own terms. Share your thoughts on their journey and tell us what stories of love and triumph inspire you. Follow their saga on our platform and become part of a community celebrating the beauty of unconventional love. Visit our website to share your story and join the conversation today.